Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you happen to be new, welcome to you. And thanks to everyone for choosing to listen. I hope this moment is finding you well. I hope you're doing okay. I don't know about you, but the beginning of 2020 was rough. It didn't feel like a celebratory ringing in of the new year and let me work on my New Year's resolutions kind of start to the year, you know? And my own personal stuff aside, a lot of people around me have had major difficulties presented to them. Unexpected deaths and medical diagnosis and just real life difficulties and turmoils. And I had a conversation earlier this week with a group of fellow teachers. It just seemed like everybody got saddled with something. And we were talking about how we were managing, how we were working through the things that had been presented to us. And I was asking this question, what did your practice look like this week? I was thinking that myself, what did I do this week that was my practice that helped me manage my way through things? And we went around and I was amazed but also not surprised that so much of what was said had little to do with the actual breathing and moving forms that we do and teach. Sure, those were in there. People were having their breathing or moving or meditation practices that they were doing, but really the practice had to do with going to wakes and funerals and being able to be present with people when they were going through things and not having any ability to have any solutions, just the practice of being present and listening and being together in a real way. And one of the things we did also talk about, which I certainly have found true for myself in the last few weeks, is that when faced with these difficulties and turmoils, it does have this effect to make me feel more present in almost a almost against my will, like thrust into being present and real, having substantive conversations with people about real things, not skating around on surfaces and, like I said last week, totally new depths of communication and new places in my relationship with my wife and children. And so there is some sort of flip side to all the difficulty and the pain. And that flip side, for me, has to do with a cherishing of what's here, what is wonderful. I need for that to occupy my mind as well, if not more, than all the injustice and pain. It deserves equal, if not more, attention. All right, so for whatever that might be worth to anybody else, just feels like it's been a rough start to the year, and I suspicion I'm not the only one. And it's certainly been helpful to talk to people, to have conversations with people, to spend time with friends who you can trust, who will challenge you on your own shit and all of that. Just people, other human beings that you can relate to, help you feel that this is all worth it. Because it is worth it. It is. I think so. Fortunately, we do have a conversation today with Coby Kozlowski, which I think is in the spirit of people coming together and figuring out how they want to be in the world and using whatever tools we can use to do that. Coby and I had met before. I thought we had only met once, but as you will learn, we actually had met another time that I did not remember before we talked. And we certainly paralleled in a lot of ways. And having a chance to get to know Coby a little bit better and compare some notes from the field over the years, it was reaffirming on a lot of fronts, and I greatly appreciated it. So I'm very glad that you're going to get to hear it today. Before we do, let me mention some upcoming dates for my Gentle is the New Advanced Easing the Pain tour. I'm going to be in Las Cruces, New Mexico, February 8th and 9th, Sarasota, Florida, March 21st and 22nd, and Austin, Texas, April 11th and 12th. You can find out more about that tour and register for those dates or more. All that stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com/tour. That's jbrownyoga.com/tour. Okay, so other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Honestly, one of the things that's been happening for me is I have been prioritizing my time a bit more. And I have been spending more time with my family and my kids. And, I didn't leave a lot of time for recording this week. Just enough time, not a lot of time. So this is going to be a little bit of more tighter intro for that reason. I might change going forward, but just for now, I really needed to make some space. And so I have done that. I have been setting some new boundaries, which were needed. So maybe I'll say a little something more about that on the other side. If you're interested, you can stick around. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get to this conversation that I had with Coby Kozlowski. Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Coby.
Are we recording or are we just checking in?
No, we're recording, but if we need to not be recording, we cannot be recording. But I always just tick go as I say hello to you.
Oh, great. Hi.
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 How are you?
I know. Great. How are you?
I have to say this moment has been long in the making.
I know. Do you remember meeting at Kripalu for like a hot second in the hallway?
It wasn't at Kripalu.
It was at, wasn't it?
Actually, it's more apropos that we met in the hallway at the last Yoga Journal conference in New York City.
Oh, I thought we also met at Kripalu. Did you used to teach there, or do you still teach there?
I have taught there. I did teach in the past. Did we have a moment at Kripalu too? Because I don't remember that moment.
Did you teach a program that was like slow Vinyasa?
Yeah, blah, 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 blah. It was slower, stronger maybe. But yeah, or gentle is the new advanced. Yes, I did.
So it was like before everybody was into slow Vinyasa.
Yeah.
I just saw you and I was like, oh my God, like that's great. Like that's what I'm into. That's really what
I'm flashing. You were right there in the hallway. You were coming in to teach a class as I was finishing my thing.
Yep, you got it. So anyways, I don't know which came first, but I just remember being like, thank you. Someone gets that Vinyasa can actually be an inward practice. We can be slow. We can take care of our body and our joints. So I really appreciated you. And then it was kind of just that kind of moment. And then that was it. And then Yoga Journal Conference. And now here we are.
Well, but that is really funny to me because I remember that moment, but I didn't know that was you. I didn't know that was Coby Kozlowski who I was talking to in the hallway.
Well,
really, I didn't. Because
I didn't mean it like that. Just more interesting.
Well, but I'm wondering how early that was because the reason this is funny because the reason I have had you on a list since I first started this show, really, maybe 4+ years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason your name's on that list is because I think anybody who was fancying themselves a professional yoga teacher before the internet,
right?
Like the Yoga Journal conference circuit was sort of the big show.
Right.
And like kind of careers were launched. I remember when Jason Crandall came on, we talked about that. He talked about doing his first Yoga Journal conference on a cruise ship.
Oh, what?
Yes. One of the earlier Yoga Journal conferences was on a cruise ship, and Jason Crandall taught at it.
It's hilarious.
Yes, it's very hilarious. But that was the big show. And I knew your name because you were a bit of a mainstay on that circuit for a while, if I recall.
Yep. I'm so grateful for Yoga Journal and all that they did and have done. And, God bless everyone in the yoga world just trying to, if yoga's about transformation, yoga's about transformation. So it's like Yoga Journal has transformed, the yoga world's transforming, Kripalu is transforming. And it's such an interesting process to watch it. I mean, someone said to me recently, and often say this to me, like, oh, Coby, you've changed so much over the years. I'm like, as almost like an insult. And I'm like, I'm great. I'm glad that I've changed. And I'm glad that I'm hopefully evolving and becoming a more, honest version of myself. So, I appreciate anybody that's interested in diving into the conversation of yoga and is willing to transform, then I think that's great. And I think Yoga Journal has definitely had its fair share of trying to figure out who they are and what they are and how can they best serve the yoga community.
Well, that's the thing. I can't remember that if that chance meeting at Kripalu, which I did not know was you until this moment. This is really crazy. I can't remember if that was before the end of this. That was earlier. That might have been way earlier on. Because in any case, I sent you an email many, many years ago.
I remember. Yeah.
And you were kind enough to get back to me. And you were like, I'm crazy busy, maybe in like 6 months. And then it didn't happen.
4 years later, here we are.
Basically, maybe it was 2 years or so ago, I basically crashed that Yoga Journal conference in the city. Andrew Tanner was like, hey, come along and I'll introduce you to people. Maybe you can get some people to come on your show. Yep. And I ran into you in the hallway and I was like, hey, you never came on my show. And you said you would. And there's always an amount of time between when an invitation gets sent out and like it actually comes to fruition. But I do think this may have been the longest gestation period. And
I appreciate your patience. And, it's like, I recently just kind of re-entered into like the social media world. And I think I probably have sent out 3 newsletters in like 10 years and 2 in the last month. So, I'm just, I don't know.
Well, that's kind of where it was going. Cause it did seem to me like you didn't like disappear, but you kind of bunkered down at Kripalu, it seemed a little bit for the last few years at least. Yeah. Well,
yes. And it's like, it's just really for me of like getting really clear. And it's always been about this of like, what's enough, I'm not into I'm into working hard, but I'm not into hustling. And, for me, it's just about what matters, what are my priorities, and really keeping that in check. And I think for me, it's just been like feeling that sense of like, what's enough and who do I want to be in this quote unquote yoga wellness world? And just really appreciating my time offline and, connecting with my family and just those things that matter. And I just, the amount of people that have given me advice about like, you need to do this marketing wise and you need to make sure you put yourself out there and be on a podcast and all these things. I'm like, Well, I don't think you should listen. Enough? I don't think you should listen to any of those things. I got off of social media a year and a half ago. So good.
And you know what? It didn't, and the result was actually more email subscribers than sales. Like it didn't hurt me.
Yeah.
That doesn't do everything that people think it does, especially if I guess I have other ways of connecting to people through emails and this show. So that does give me an opportunity to connect to people in a broader way, not just like my immediate community or whatever.
It's also weird, right?
It is very weird.
Like,
and
I don't know when you got into this whole scene, but like I started out coaching first, and I got into coaching when I was in my late 20s. I'd just gotten back from a semi trip around the world and I needed a job. And my mom had this article and she's like, I just read this article. I think you should do this or be this. And I'm like, what is this? It was like an article about being a life coach. And I'm like, what is this job? What are people doing? And I, a couple of days later was on my way to New York City and I was sitting next to this guy on the train. We just were talking like about the meaning of life. And I was like, oh, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I run a life coach training. And I was like, what? My mother just told me I should be a life coach. And this is really before everybody was a life coach. Mm-hmm. And I was like, all right, well, and he's like, oh, I have a program starting on Friday or whenever it was. So I just was like, oh, I guess this is some weird little, finger pointing in the direction. So I took his workshop, and then that was kind of the beginning. And when I started coaching, I remember putting ads in the paper being like, hi, like, this is what I do. Does anyone want to, do this for free? So I think, and for me, I really just did it because I loved it. It was never about money. It was never about anything other than just connecting and sharing. And for me, that's just, I've tried to stay in integrity that way of just like, okay, why do I do this? What do I love about coaching and yoga and wellness, and what's the real essence underneath all of it? And then thinking, okay, if I'm going to go on social media, how can I do it in a way that still feels authentic? Or if I'm going to go on someone's podcast, like, how do I stay true, and not try to be anything other than just human, trying to learn to ride the waves of life as skillfully as I can and be in the experiment. So anyways, long way of saying thanks for your patience and having me here. And
no, I'm just glad it's happened. And I'm also, you said so many interesting things in that, in particular earlier on when you said like things changing over the years, because I do think there's been quite an evolution, and that's sort of a ongoing theme. And I think one of the primary motivators of me doing this show is, I got into it like you. Well, I say actually you got into coaching first, which is interesting. We'll come back to that. I got into yoga in my early 20s, and it was right before it became mainstream, before the internet, and then like in the early 90s. And then at some point it did hit, and we all kind of rode the wave of those of us who were really passionate about yoga. Right. Mm-hmm. And I like came into my adulthood basically. Mm-hmm. Now I'm 45 and I have 2 kids and a mortgage and stuff,
Right.
And I'm like, how the fuck did I get here? And like, I had a yoga center for 10 years in Brooklyn.
Oh, I remember that. I remember hearing about you shutting that down or selling it.
Until the rent got crazy, like it does for everybody. Like it's doing for even Jiva Mukti and everybody else in New York City right now.
Sure.
And so that kind of evolution. And now even just to hear you, like one of the first things that you were saying when we started this conversation, like where to put your efforts, like if I'm putting all this time and effort in doing social media posts, it actually has to help me make more money. Like otherwise there's no reason to do it.
Well,
really.
no, I would just to actually that's not actually true for me. What's more true is if I'm going to do it, I have to feel connected to it. Mm. It's like I feel really, I don't know. I feel like one of the things that my parents did a really good job with was teaching me about having a healthy relationship with money and how to be skillful with it. And so for me, social media is not about like a return on investment or a return on my time in the sense of like financial return. For me, it's become, because honestly, it's been like the last week that I'm like, or the last couple of weeks that I'm like, okay, let me like tap into this social media world again, see if it's interesting. And for me, what it's been is about, like, I love storytelling. I've always, loved sharing stories. I love teaching through stories. And so for me, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to share some stories just to share some stories. Do I appreciate when people listen or when they comment or when they share with other people? Totally. But it like, honest to God, like it's not about money for me at this point. It's about...
well, I get that. I mean, I do this show because I love doing it and I learn, and it's like part of my growth. So I totally understand what you're saying. But at the same time, I'm going to challenge you because at the same time, I saw your recent Instagram posts and they're great. They're stories you're telling and they're very engaging and they're long. I like it. They're not minute videos. They're like 4 to 7 minutes or whatever.
I don't know how to do it in a minute.
That actually requires a little investment, which is not very Instagram-y, just so you know.
Not very Instagram-y.
It's not very Instagram-y, but I liked it. But at the same time, would you be doing that if you didn't have a new book coming out? Like, you know what I mean? Like, would you?
Totally. So that also being said, and so it's one of the reasons, and I hear you, right? Like, I don't want to be blinded to my own, like, if someone said, hey, I'll give you $1 million if you go on Instagram, everybody could be like, great, let's do it. Yeah. And it's one of my friends, Katie Brower. I don't know if you know Katie. She's an amazing yoga teacher and educator. She's the one that's really been like, Coby, you have so much to share, and it's great that you want to live like remotely and quietly and, have your community that you share with. And like, there is a bigger audience that you can share with, and let me help you, or let me lovingly encourage you to try this out and just, put yourself on social media and see what you think. So she's been the one that's been like, here you go, like, fly, little bird, get out of the nest. So it is about getting the book into more hands, because what I wrote in the book and what I share in the book really was, I did my first yoga class when I was 17 and, did asana yoga, just like down dog yoga, that kind of yoga. And it wasn't about philosophy or anything like that. And then when I was in my early 20s, had an injury or ended up being bedridden for, 3 months, and had ended up from age 21 to 27 having 9 surgeries, on and off crutches for 6 years. And it was during that time that I really went into this other realm of like, wait, what else is yoga if I can't be physical? And that's when I was doing all this coaching stuff and dived into these inquiries of what does it mean to fully live? What does it mean like to discover who I really am, who I really want to be? And so that began the journey of like human fulfillment. And those, for me at least, I ruminated about questions of like, what happens when I die? Like, what is all this about? And I was like an existential detective. And so the book is really the last 20 some odd years of inquiry, of coaching, of yoga, of, whatever language we speak of human fulfillment and learning to ride the waves of life more skillfully. So the book, for me, one of the things that I'm trying to do is, one of the things I put out on Instagram is like, as many books as I sell pre-ordered, I'm going to donate all the proceeds to create free content, free, programming, scholarships for people that maybe financially couldn't afford this kind of, these kind of trainings or teachings, and use my time in a way to share the wisdom that I was gifted at a younger age for people that may be in financial need. So I am trying to leverage a place of, I've got a mortgage to pay, I've got a family to take care of, and how do I also share this wisdom for those that are interested and make it as accessible as I possibly can. So that is the balance for me. And
don't get me wrong. I'm advocating for teachers making more money, not less money, because, teachers making the $25 a class at the center. And
sure,
I'm all for you getting paid for your work. And I think that you've been somebody who's, you're still doing it after all these years.
I know. And so are you. And so are you. But don't you feel like, I'm in my 40s and it does feel, I definitely want to get paid. And maybe it's the Libra in me. I don't know. I don't even believe in astrology like that, but there is a balance of, receiving and sharing, and what is enough, it's like, I don't work in a yoga studio in that sense where I don't teach a lot of asana classes anymore. I teach mainly, trainings and workshops and programs. But so for me, it's just always the question of like, what's enough? And
I hear that too.
And I don't live in New York City, right? So I live in the Berkshires where
me neither. I moved 2 years ago to Pennsylvania. So for a similar reason, I needed a slower lifestyle, and I needed my kids were growing up and I was missing their childhoods, and I was like, this sucks.
Right.
And it's too expensive, and I was crazy, and I slowed everything down. It's been much better.
Well, that's it too. It's like, I was contemplating about death. I often will meditate on death, and I have no idea what happens when we actually die from this physical body. But for me, that practice of meditating on death really gets me pretty quickly clear about what matters. It's like, okay, if I'm going to die sooner than later, or if I'm going to die ever, obviously, it's like, what matters? How do I want to show up? How do I want to spend my time? These moments really are precious. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it is just what happens in your 40s when you're just like, oh, right. Like, here we go. What really matters? And so for me, I hear like for you, it's just that sense of spending time with your kids and doing work that you still love and getting paid doing what you love. Well,
you also got responsibilities you got to meet.
Yeah, totally.
But I hear you about death. I mean, my whole yoga trip is rooted in reconciling my mom's death. So it's a rooting meditation for me as well.
Yeah.
And because that happened when I was 16. And I actually remember at 16, like my friends were stressing out about like some test. And I was like, this is so stupid. People die. Why are you stressing about a math test? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, so I hear you as that being kind of like a rooting thing.
But, yeah. And then it's that balance again, right? So what's that? I don't know who said it, but it's like, live as if you were going to live forever and die tomorrow. Right. So it's like the paradox of like, how do I do it? And so to me, that's where yoga really has become this, I always say that yoga provides zero answers, but infinite inquiries and experiments. And, can we go, what experiment is calling each of us at different phases of our life? And so for me, I'm just in this phase of, like what's enough and how can I share these teachings and what do I actually think is useful? What's just nonsense?
Yeah.
Nonsense that I've been saying, nonsense that I'm like, do I really believe this? Is this really true? And part of writing the book was a really, really good opportunity to be like, have I just said this for 20 years or do I really believe this still? And it was a really amazing process for me to get really clear about, this is where I can come back to. Like I threw it all away. I'm like, I don't believe that. And then I'm like, oh no, that one's still good. Or that's still useful.
Well, I think a lot of folks are grappling with those questions now because of everything that's happened with all the guru figures. And there was all this stuff that we were taught back when. What
was your background? What's your background, yoga?
Well, I started in the early 90s at the Jivamukti Yoga Center on 2nd Avenue.
Yep.
And then I gravitated towards Ashtanga Vinyasa and I studied that for a little bit. And then I studied a Iyengar method for a bit. And then ultimately I landed on teachings largely inspired by TKV Desikachar.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of, I got to a place where I could do stuff physically and I was lauded for that and sort of like the advanced guy in the room or whatever, and even got teaching jobs because of that.
Sure.
But I was in a lot of pain and miserable and totally unreconciled about my mom's death, which is what is really doing yoga in the first place. Like you, it's interesting to hear you say that when you first got to coaching in your early 20s, which seemed to me because of you weren't able to do some things physically, as you were telling us.
Yeah.
It was a contemplative thing, you see, like me, I was asking these questions about why am I even alive? That's why I started doing yoga, not for strength or flexibility or anything like that.
Yep. So for you, like, what's yoga? What is yoga to you now? Like, what does yoga mean to you now?
What does it mean?
Or like, why are you still in, like, why the yoga world?
Well, I mean, what I would say is that I, like you, it seems, learned some tools that worked. Like they worked for me, and I'm not suffering in ways that I was before. And and I was able to kind of heal this gaping spiritual wound of my mom's death and see it as a blessing.
Mm.
And that,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that because, and I just continuing, even with this show, I'm just continuing to practice and do the things that I've learned to try to be well and like have a life that I feel good about.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself seems to have led to whatever roles I'm playing in terms of being a teacher. Mm-hmm. And why I'm so passionate about yoga, because now I've been teaching for 25 years and you see it work for other people too.
Yeah, sure.
And that's incredibly inspiring in the same way I hear you saying like, wow, well, I there's a fulfillment of purpose to having your practice expressed in that way where it's shared and helps others.
Well, that's it, right? It's like the main programs that I teach. I created a program 10 years ago called Quarter Life Calling, Creating an Extraordinary Life in Your 20s. And it's actually what the book was. I was inspired by that workshop to write the book. And, for me, so I spend a lot of time working with 20-year-olds, which I just love. I love this emerging adults and this time of like really checking in with those questions that I had in my 20s of who am I really? What happens when I die? Like, what does it mean to live in integrity? All the questions. And so for me, it's just really about coming back to, this coming home to like, okay, well, the questions are here again, but it's like, and now what? And now what? And now what? So for me, it's always interesting to talk to people like you of just like, and so for you, what is yoga now? And so if you were to give advice to a 20-year-old of what matters from where you stand now, not from where you were when you were 20 something starting, what would you say? Like what matters? I
mean, gosh, I don't know. I think they're going to have to figure everything out for themselves. So I'm not going to tell. One thing I know is I'm not supposed to know for anybody else. I like barely know for myself. But if I could talk to myself, if I could talk to 20-year-old me now,
great.
I think it would be about finding this kind of balance between, inward care, like, and like outward boundaries or something, like being able to have both the ability to go inside myself to a place of knowing. That's it. Like there's a cultivation of like an intuitive sense of knowing in yourself. Mm-hmm. And that has been the most valuable thing that I've cultivated. And
what do you think has helped you cultivate that? Like what specific, was it like asana, pranayama, or just all of it?
I mean, I think that is why I'm passionate about, going back to your other question, is that yoga practice taught me sustained attention. And the ability to sustain attention on something, to put your attention there, keep it there for as long as you want, and then release it at will, like that mind muscle or concentration muscle, that basic building block that you get doing breathing and moving exercises. It led to some other kind of facility in me where I'm able to like have more clarity about who I am and what I want to be and the choices I make. And that to me, that's the thing, is like, how do you explain to someone how like inhale your arms up and exhale your arms down leads to that is the crazy impossible thing to do, right?
That's good.
Someone sees a video of you doing some stupid, simple breathing and moving exercise. You're like, this helped me figure out who I am. And they're like, what? Like,
really? That's good. That's really good. Yeah.
Well, listen, wait a second. I love that you're asking me all these questions, but I'm curious to learn some about you because earlier, you said that you sort of started a little bit with coaching, and then I'm curious, because I only know you more as a yoga teacher than this other coaching world that you've inhabited.
Sure.
And I'm curious about when did you end up getting into being a teacher, and how did you get to your first Yoga Journal conference gig?
So all great questions. I'm really not wonderful with like remembering timelines. So I don't want to like, I'm going to do my best to tell you the truth, because I'm just like, I don't know, how did it all happen?
We're not going to hold you to dates. We're not going to
don't hold me to any dates.
Don't worry.
It's 2020. That I do know. So I got into the coaching world. So like I said, I took that workshop, and I remember watching the woman on stage, and I was like, oh, I'm not into this. I wasn't into what they were saying. Specifically, I wasn't into like the content as much as I was the woman that was sharing. And I was like, that woman is so alive and is so passionate. And someday I want to do something like that. From day one, my father says that I came out of the womb talking, and I've never stopped. And, for me, sharing and talking and storytelling has just always been a thing for me. And I remember saying to my mom when I was really young, like really, really young, like, I just want to make a living talking. And my mother said to me, as long as you don't have too many bad habits, I'm sure you can make it happen. You can make it happen. And really, she was right. It was just like, okay, like there was a way, but I never knew like what I wanted to teach or share. I knew I didn't want to be a math teacher or history teacher. Anyway, so when I took that coaching workshop, I just remember thinking like, that is interesting to me, like to talk about the human condition, to talk about fears and grief and sorrow and joy and ecstasy. And what does it mean when your mother dies? And what does it mean when, life is challenging, but what does it also mean to celebrate life and joy and success and ease and all of that? And all these different flavors of life. So that for me really, though I had been dabbling in the yoga world and dabbling with some coaching stuff, or not coaching stuff, with just like, reading different philosophy books and all that kind of stuff. That was the moment where I was like, this is a doorway in. I want to keep going this way. So that coaching world, I, ended up taking on every training I possibly could. And I stumbled upon, I think it was Dr. Frawley's book, Ayurveda and the Mind, maybe. It was some book about Ayurveda and the mind. And I remember being like, whoa, like there's this whole world of Ayurveda and how the mind works and consciousness works. Like this is interesting. So I ended up taking an online 2-year Ayurvedic correspondence course. And so I did that before yoga teacher training too. So then that kind of led me to, and again, I had been doing some asana, but it wasn't really my main focus. I like you, just the Ashtanga world, the Vinyasa world. And then I remember
where were you when you were in New York when you were taking classes?
So I have moved 20 times from ages 20 until now. So at this time I was in New England. I was in New England, and then I had moved out to California, and then I was in Hawaii for a bit. So lots of different places. So I took that Ayurvedic training. Oh, then I was taking a coaching workshop, and then I just remember being like, I want to be a yoga teacher, and I want to like dive more into this. And I ended up signing up for this yoga teacher training in New England. And then I just went on to take like every training you could think of. I was like, okay, I need to know positive psychology 101, flower essence therapy, dance, expressive arts, like just all of it. And in my 20s, and I just really became super hungry for how much information can I learn about the human condition? And I really thought about it as like, how many languages can I speak about being human? Whether it's Tantra or Zen or the brain or nutrition. I just wanted to know like what serves us and how do I go in? What are the tools to go in? It was kind of like the liberal arts of going inside. So then I ended up in Hawaii, and I wanted to create this program for people in their teens and 20s to use all of this like wisdom that I had collected about like, okay, like this is really useful information, but I wasn't into anything 100% or even 50%. And it was like, okay, I like this one thing from this workshop I took. I like this one thing from, this particular course or whatever. So it was really like, what has been serving me? What tools and practices have I used that have been helpful? And I want to share them with other people. I want to share them with young adults. Now this is years later from my own accident and me beginning in this journey of yoga and wellness and coaching. And I just wanted to share with people. And it wasn't about money. It was just literally like, how do I get people together and to share this? So I ended up creating this program, and I was trying to get it into different high schools. And I had no idea how, the Department of Education worked. So I was in Hawaii, living on the Big Island, and I went to this high school, and I literally just like knocked on the teachers' doors. I was like, hi, my name is Coby. I created this program for teenagers and young adults about how to use these contemplative practices to love life more. Can I teach it here? And they were just like, that's cute. No. So long story short-ish, I was talking to my friend Melissa, who I'd done a coaching program with a million years before. And she said, hey, this thing you're trying to do out in Hawaii, I just read something online about this program at this place called Kripalu that runs a program for college students or 18 to 25-year-olds. And it sounds really similar to what you're trying to do. So I get on Kripalu's website. Even though I grew up in Massachusetts, I didn't know about Kripalu, or I didn't really know much about it. And it wasn't the type of yoga that I was practicing. So I get on Kripalu's website and I read this description of this program, and I'm like, how did this person like steal my workshop and now they're teaching it at Kripalu? She didn't, obviously. And so long story short, I didn't know Kripalu was.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.